Hello, and welcome to the Community IT Innovators Technology Topics Podcast, where we discuss nonprofit technology, cybersecurity, tech project implementation, strategic planning, and nonprofit IT careers. Find us at communityit.com.
Thank you for joining this Community IT Podcast Part 2. You can find Part 1 in your podcast feed if you subscribe wherever you listen to podcasts. Welcome everyone to the Community IT Innovators webinar series. We're so happy that you could join us for today's webinar on diverse perspectives on thriving in nonprofit tech careers. We're excited to partner with 3 women in technology today from 3 different career paths who will have a conversation about building supports and finding environments where women of color can thrive in our sector. So Sarah, do you want to introduce yourself?
Yes. Hi, Carolyn. I am very excited to be here today. My name is Sarah Wolfe. I'm the sales manager for Community IT, and I use she, her pronouns, and I'm a queer, cis, mixed Latina woman who lives on Anacostan land. I would love to briefly introduce our panelists before they share their own stories. We wanted to gather people with a wide range of experiences since nonprofit and nonprofit tech is such a wide field. Stef Cruz is a strategic communications professional with over 15 years of experience mobilizing millions of individuals to action across national social movements, including the Women's March, Families Belong Together, and the March for Our Lives. She was one of the first digital strategists on Capitol Hill, and most recently, Stef served as the Vice President of Marketing and Digital at America's Promise Alliance. Angela has been the Director of Finance and Operations at Academy of Hope for 2 years and has over 13 years of experience in the private and nonprofit sectors. Angela is a graduate of the Columbia University Nonprofit Management Master's Program and has served on multiple nonprofit boards. Finally, we have Sandy Martins. She serves as the Director of Information Technology at Mentor. She is a proud first-generation Cape Verdean American with 16 years diverse experience in the technology sector, including network technology, health IT, and software application development. She's spent years helping manage complex and technology-driven projects and holds a bachelor's degree in computer graphics and new media from Johnson & Wales University, and will be completing her MBA program at Providence College in 2023. So the next poll, which is asking, which of these best describes your role in your organization? Being in leadership, being able to influence hiring and internal culture for the whole organization, being in management, influencing hiring and internal culture for your team, being a staffer, learning what you can do to make your environment more inclusive, and job seeking ways to identify an inclusive organization. And we've got somebody who's in the other section, which is also very exciting. I'm going to leave it open for just another moment. Seems like we've stabilized, so go ahead and share these results. 40% are in leadership. Well, 38% are in leadership, 19 in management, 38 are staffers, and we have 1 person who is other. So that is very exciting, because my next question was going to be, what kinds of power dynamics and organizational structures make a good space for a diverse and inclusive workplace?
Stef Cruz is speaking.
I can jump in on this question. Thank you, Sarah. We've been thinking about these questions as we've been preparing for this conversation, and the words that really come to mind for me are shared power. So to the extent that organizations, especially traditional organizations. So I kind of think of corporate nonprofits, like that's a thing, right? Nonprofits that are huge and that function in a certain way versus smaller nonprofits. And I think either way, there's a question around traditional power dynamics and hierarchy. And I think in order to really create sort of future forward, diverse and inclusive environments, we have to think about from a leadership perspective, how much are we willing to share and relinquish power and create space for more junior and mid-level staff to provide input because it needs to be an iterative process, right? Because no one has the blueprint of like, oh, this is how we create it. This is how we get it right. It needs to be informed by people's experiences. And in order to do that well, you need to be willing to say like, I didn't get this right. And I need to listen and I need to hear, and I'm willing to share power and how we create the environment and the dynamics that we have for really diverse environments. Something that is really important to me as well is understanding the different forms of leadership that exist. Really thinking about quiet leadership and what does that look like. So I found in some of the nonprofit spaces that I've been in, when I did get a seat at the table, it's the person who's speaking the loudest, who's speaking the most, who gets the most respect, who gets heard, which tends to be cis white males or white females. And so I think to be a really inclusive and thoughtful leader at the top, you have to be able to navigate how do you create space for the person who processes differently, for the person who might be scared because of this is a new experience for them, right? To have a seat at the table, to be moving into a more leadership director type role. How do you create space so that you're hearing from the people who are super extroverted and have lots of ideas and are used to a very comfortable sort of owning space, and then creating space for the people that this is new for, and they're going to be silenced or they process differently. So to me, this is really important around being thoughtful and creating safe spaces, as well as that sharing of power. We have to be willing to say we don't have all the answers. The way that our organization leads is not perfect, and we're willing to take an input so that we can learn and help to co-create this safer, more diverse environment. So that's sort of my thoughts there.
Angela Kim is speaking next.
Yeah, I 100% agree with everything that Stef said. I think for me in the past couple of years, especially because well, let me backtrack. One of the things that really attracted me to the organization that I'm at right now, Academy of Hope, is looking at the top leadership. I saw it was very diverse, and I really love that. So I was immediately attracted to that. And when in my initial conversations, I understood as part of our strategic plan and direction, DEI was always part of that conversation. So I knew the organization was very intentional about being more inclusive and supporting and uplifting diversity and really operationalizing that. Because one of the things we've had as a leadership team here, we do have a DEI task force, so that made up of a cross section of the organization. So we're very much intentional about always, having open two-way communication about that and listening to our staff members. We survey the staff to see where they're at. Are we making progress? Where are people, in terms of different aspects of metrics that we've defined? So listening is a huge component of that. And I think what we've really done is to ensure that we have a definite framework for what that needs to look like, and really helping leadership with exact tools to support us. Because I've quite literally said, and I'll be totally honest, that at certain times during especially Black Lives Matters, I raised my hand in leadership meetings and I said, I have a very diverse team. I want to be respectful and mindful of the environment right now. I would like to have some tools about how to approach this. I don't know how to do this right or wrong, but I would like to know more about how I should approach this and what some best practices might be. And in the initial moments when I didn't know exactly how it should be done, I quite honestly just gave my team space. I said, I know there's a lot going on. This is probably, I'm just going to frankly acknowledge that it's probably hard to focus on work because there's a lot happening in the world. So if you have anything to share, would like to talk about things, then let's just put it out there, you know? So, I mean, just starting with that, I think, and not assuming and trying to be mindful of all of our differences. And I actually recently had a great conversation with one of my peers about one of my team members, and she gave me a wonderful, great perspective about, you know, maybe as a Black young female, perhaps her perspective might be this. And I said, you know what, thank you so much. I had not even considered that. And now that changes the way that I approach her, you know, and those types of different perspectives really help me to be a better leader. And having those conversations openly across our leadership team has been really helpful for me.
That's awesome. I know that we're trying to pack a whole lot into not even a full hour of conversation, but I would love to move us into the next poll, which sort of dovetails on that a little bit with, you know, how do workspaces deal with mental health? Which is a little bit of a shift, but if people feel comfortable answering, that would be great. And we're wondering if your workplace prioritizes mental health, if they value mental health, or if there's devaluing of mental health. And that means, you know, are they providing high quality, easily accessed benefits? Do they, you know, create the structures around you know, healthy boundaries, work-life balance? Do they stick to those? Things like that. You know, I know that there's a large variety of organizations in size and in need and ability, but it's something that we can all talk about. And we've stabilized, so I'm going to close the poll and share these results. Thank you to everybody who felt comfortable answering. You know, 15% said that they work for organizations that really prioritize mental health, providing easily accessed, high quality resources. Realizing that you guys probably can't even see the entire sentence. I don't want to broke. 69% say that they do work for someplace that values mental health, and 15% say that they work for places that devalue mental health. You know, with one of those things that we talked about, seeing that mental health has become such a big deal, and we've been checking in and being more cognizant about it. You know, people have talked about this being the great resignation, and I listened to an NPR article that was like, no, it's not the great resignation, it's the great renegotiation. People are standing up for themselves and saying, in order to be able to work, I need to be able to do, I need X, Y, or Z things. And if you can't provide them, I'll find someplace else that does. So with burnout and self-care, not all self-care is bubble baths and massages. How do you practice self-care professionally?
Sandy Martins.
I can answer here. Although bubble baths and massages are good too. I don't mind any of that. But I love this question. And there's two things that I definitely practice for professional self-care. One of which is organizing and managing my time. There's this quote that I have every morning I look at, and it says, "For every minute spent organizing, an hour is earned." So the things that I do to manage my time is at the end of the week, usually on a Friday, I look at the following week to see what my workload looks like. You know, where am I being placed at for any meetings? And if it's a really heavy meeting week, I definitely ensure that I have blocks of times that I put in just to take a break or just to catch up or switch gears in between meetings. I also reach out to meeting owners and ask, am I needed? Like, do I have to be there? And is this something I could just review as part of meeting notes and come up to speed on? But, you know, if I can get that time back, great. And if I don't, so be it. But definitely, it doesn't hurt to ask that question. And something that my organization does is that they support focus time, or DNS, or do not schedule. So that's about 2-hour blocks that we have on our calendars. And it really is just a time to just not having meetings scheduled, really focus and really get your accomplishments done. The other thing that I do in honor is mental health days off. And I just want to preface this to say that, with your vacations and personal time and depending on your organization's policy, you should never feel guilty to take those days off and really have a mental break from the workload. I remember early on in my career, and Angela, I'm pretty sure you can probably relate to this, is that I felt so guilty for even thinking about taking a day off. Like in my mind, I'm like, no, I need to work. I need to be there. I need to be on. I need to, get things done. And I realized over time I was really burning myself out by doing that, which meant that I wasn't really working to my best ability. So years later, I recognized that it is important to have a healthy balance between work and self-care for the sake of my sanity, for the sake of my health, and even for the sake of my team members. So I definitely want to ensure that there's a break in between that I can, have the ability to have those mental health days off if and when I needed them.
Yeah, I definitely have experienced burnout many times in my life in various phases. I think one of the things I really love about Academy of Hope is we have a Flex Friday benefit, which means we have every other Friday off. I didn't really realize how much it would help me, but I truly love that benefit and I fully take advantage of that. And we really try hard not to send emails on that day when folks are taking off, and we try not to bother people with emails on the weekends, et cetera, or after hours. So that's one of the things that I do, or as an organization. I think the other thing, and I've been focusing on this with my team and trying to model it as well, as asking for help when needed. And saying no to things. And I'm really helping my team to learn how to do that because, some folks understanding the power dynamic as well. For some folks, it's hard to say no. And some people are people pleasers, so it's even harder to say no. And they feel like asking for help, as this relates to mental health, means that you can't do your job, and then you start having all these other questions. Should I not have my job? Is my job at risk, et cetera? So I'm trying hard to model that for my team as well, to say, I need help. I definitely can't do all this. We need to reprioritize. We need to rethink about the work here. And I try to stop my team members as well to say, okay, this is not realistic. Let's reprioritize and figure out what you really, really can do so you don't burn yourself out. And because I recognize folks that are people pleasers and folks that do have a hard time saying no, I have to really help them set boundaries and really being realistic with that workload. I'm a recent new mom, and for me, being a very, what I consider a very, very hard worker, I really had to, for my sanity and my mental health, had to really define and reset what does my work output and what my expectations look like. And I had to redo that. And it was really, really hard for me. I'm still working on that because I really couldn't perform at the same level. And to be okay with it's good enough was a huge, and I'm still working on it, was a huge thing for me to work on. So that, in addition to really delegating things and truly offloading things off of your plate, is a huge task as well, to really make sure if you have delegated it properly, you don't have to really step in quite as much, and it can really be off of your mind and your plate. So those are all things that have helped.
Awesome. I am going to jump. There was a question asked to the Q&A, paraphrasing a little bit. How do you find ways to talk with colleagues or leadership, especially leadership, that doesn't necessarily understand their own ignorance around DE&I issues? And when do you take the kid gloves off?
So for me, just connecting a little bit to the previous question and connecting it to this question, I think there's this expectation also within nonprofits that you're there to do good. right? We are passionate about the issue, we're passionate about making an impact, but to what extent is that at the expense of your own well-being? So when I was working within nonprofits, it was easy for me to work 70, 100 hours a week, which is like physically impossible, right? Like it means I was not sleeping, but I was so committed to the cause, I was so committed to the work. And so I kind of pushed myself in that way. And I think there's something about the expectation around Black and Brown women, especially, that can get stuff done, right? So like this idea that there's an insane amount of responsibility that was being put on me because I was capable, and because they knew they can trust me to get it done. And even times where some of my colleagues who were white colleagues, older men, were given a task, given 6 months to work on it, and then I was given a week to fix it and get it done, right? But it all came at the expense of my personal well-being, of my personal time, of my mental health. And so the answer to your question, Elizabeth, I'm probably pretty extreme in this, is that at some point I said enough. Like I defined myself and my well-being as number one. And I was willing to push back as far as I had to, because I refuse to work somewhere that does not value and respect me and does not value my own mental health. And it's this interesting flip that happened for myself also, of like, I have value. We all do, right? Like Angela, Sandy, Sarah, we are good at our jobs, right? So people need to feel lucky to have us on their teams. And in exchange for that, you need to understand my lived experience. You need to understand how I feel when I come into meetings. You have to understand how my background makes me experience this meeting, this work slightly differently than everyone else. And why what's happening outside in the world, Angela, to your point of like, I can't work right now. I can't, because my heart is broken, because I see myself, I see my son, I see my brother in George Floyd on the ground, right? So like understanding that humanizing piece. And I think I personally have a very low tolerance for not being open to the conversation. And I kind of voted with my feet and I quit my job because I was just like, I refuse to be in spaces that don't honor this, because it chips away at me personally every single day. Like the intersection between our personal lives and our careers, especially those of us who are in the nonprofit sector. Angela left her corporate job because this mattered to her, right? This is personal. And so where that intersection is. So a little bit militant, kid gloves completely off. But I mean, we have to hold the line for ourselves at some point. And if we don't, it comes at an expense to us personally. It's been my personal experience.
Okay, keeping an eye on time. You all know that I had 3 other questions lined up, and we're not going to be able to get to them all, talking about what do people need to invest in to retain talent? How do you as a manager help, with equity and inclusivity, and, what there's a whole bunch of things we haven't even been able to address yet today. Please, I'm going to open it up just a little bit to so we've had a question come in on the Q&A, and then maybe do a quick 30-second closing thoughts. Somebody asked, do you have any thoughts on the acceptance of conscious code switching versus the recognition of falling into the system? And how do you bring others into the difference between them? I actually am unsure on the idea of conscious code switching versus falling into the system. Does anybody else have familiarity with this concept?
I'm not sure either.
Okay.
I think it's a little bit of like doing what you have to do to get by, to move forward in a space, right? So I'm from New York. You probably can't hear my super New York accent because I've whitewashed it over the years, starting in college. And I do show up in a very different way depending on who I'm talking to, which of my colleagues. And I think, unfortunately, it feels like it's something that we have to do in certain spaces to be taken seriously. But I do believe in the radical authenticity. And so showing up as your full self, I think it does require a certain level of comfort with yourself, and also understanding that you might make others uncomfortable. But it takes time. I've definitely gotten closer, but I will not deny that I code switch quite a lot depending on who I'm talking to, what room I'm in, which client I'm speaking to. And I think it's a matter of people who create space for you to be that authentic. And I don't think it's the norm, not right now, maybe later, unfortunately. I mean, I feel like I'm judged every time I open my mouth, right? That doesn't matter who I'm talking to. I have to be very careful. I have to choose my words very carefully, depending on who it is I'm speaking to. Sorry, Sandy, you were going to say something.
And I was gonna applaud you for even saying things like that, because I don't even think that when I started my career, I recognized that I was doing that, like code switching. You know what I mean? I'm from Boston. I'm a Cape Verdean woman. We speak fast. I use certain terms that people might not find to be as professional. So I definitely started to visualize how I was positioned in the workspace, especially in corporate, where I had to be careful about how I spoke. I had to be careful on how I positioned myself, what I wore to work. Like a lot of that really changed over the years. And as I got older and grew into my career, I realized, like, what am I doing? Like, I'm not being myself here. I'm trying to be someone that I'm not. Until I really start to recognize that and really respect that space that I was in, at that point I started to really be myself, and use the terms that I would use if I'm hanging out with my girlfriends or if I'm going out. And little by little, people start to really recognize my personality and really to like me for who I am. So it's really interesting how I never realized I was doing that, and until years later, I had to kind of just check myself and say, "What are you doing here? Like, who are you trying to be?" And just really be yourself. And over time, people are gonna get to learn that part of you.
I absolutely love that this is where this conversation has gone. We need to, for Q&A, other people have asked some other questions. We are definitely going to be following up with an email in terms of resources. And if you do have any other questions to submit, please send them, I post them here, or send in a response email, and we will be following up in the next week with resources and things. Carolyn, I know needs to jump in and do the closing parts. So I hate to stop the conversation here, but let's have Carolyn take over.
I do too. So sorry about that. Listen, I can see already, I feel like we need a part 2 of this conversation. So we'll see about arranging that for some time in the future as well. Thank you so much for your great questions today, everyone who's stuck with us to this point, and the people who registered and asked questions. Thank you so much, Steph, Angela, Sandy, and Sarah, for sharing your experiences so openly with us and helping us think together about these tips and best practices. I wanted to just remind people of our learning objectives and the takeaways. We wanted to describe organizational practices and individual behaviors that could contribute or be obstacles to having a safer, more equitable, more inclusive nonprofit tech industry. I think we scratched the surface of that, but I think you gave us a lot to think about of the things that we can do in our own situations and in our own organizations. I loved that everyone talked about having open and transparent conversations being so central to this work. So I feel like a good job of modeling that, showing rather than just telling, that you need to be open about some of these things that are really, really difficult to talk about. I'm gonna hand it back over to Sarah to talk about some of our best practices that we had come up with.
In our conversations leading up to this, sort of the things that we had really talked about, having inclusive workplaces, you really have to value your staff's time and opinions. I'm trying to consolidate some of our conversation, creating healthy work-life boundaries, sticking to them, creating space to listen to your staff. Steph had talked about, wanting to make sure that there's room at the table, that there's not just room, but you're also listening. Invest in your staff. I know it's really tempting, and it's very common at nonprofits to, mission first, but in order to get that mission, you have to invest in your staff so they can stay and not burn out. And creating a fostering open community, the idea of being able to embrace the fact that you've done something wrong or you do need to ask for help, and creating, if somebody's uncomfortable, how do you actually um, talk about that stuff as part of work. I know we're at time. It's 4 o'clock. People probably have meetings, but I want to say, whoops, well, that happened. Thank you for coming, and I would like to thank you, Stef. Stef Cruz's website is www.stefcruz, all one word, Stef spelled with an F.com. Angela is Academy of Hope is aohdc.org. And Sandy, the mentoring website is www.mentoring.org. Thank you so much for coming and sharing. This was great, and I can't wait to do this again.
Thank you for joining this Community IT Podcast Part 2. You can find Part 1 in your podcast feed if you subscribe wherever you listen to podcasts.
Community IT does these free webinars and podcasts for our community, and we love sharing our knowledge and experience. If you have more questions or are having trouble with your IT at your nonprofit, please get in touch with us on our website, www.communityit.com, so we can start a conversation or schedule an assessment. Downloading any of our free resources there will get you signed up for our webinar reminders, and you can attend our next webinar in real time and ask our experts your own questions. If you love podcasts, please subscribe and leave us a rating to help others find this leadership resource for nonprofits.